Hello, Flickering Myth family, and all you VHS horror hounds out there. My name is EJ, and welcome to our channel. We have a bit different of a video today for you. We are going to be looking at VHS 1985, but besides just a review of the film, which I'll get to in a moment, we are going to be looking at each and every segment and ranking them from worst to best. A spoiler though, I don't really have like a worst, so it's just going to be my least favorite to my favorite segment in this latest VHS entry. Enough of this intro, let's get into the video right now. For over a decade now, VHS movies have been kind of this go-to for horror fans. I remember when the first one came out, it was around the same time ABC's of Death was out, and it felt like a great golden time for anthology horror films. While other anthology style movies have kind of dipped out of fashion, VHS has kept it up, and now that they've been teaming with Shudder for the last couple entries, it really feels like VHS has found its groove again, because truly, 1985 is the best VHS movie since number 2, and number 2 lives rent-free in my head. Safe Haven, oh, sticks with me forever. There's actually one in here that kind of reminds me of that a bit. Yeah, I really like the VHS franchise. I've been pretty kind of nice to some of the ones that aren't too great, but it paid off when I'm like, holy smokes, this one is amazing. I love each and every segment for different reasons. There's some that are a little bit weaker than others, but for the most part, I found myself enthralled by each story, and I kept going, what are we gonna do next? After the 90s one that had that hellscape finale, I was just like, where can we go next? And what they did was scale it back. We're back to the 80s. You know what I love the most? This doesn't feel like nostalgia 80s bait. I just reviewed Totally Killer on this channel, an 80s inspired slasher, and it felt like, guys, remember how cool the 80s were? This is totally tubular and totally rad. That's fine and all, but this does not feel like manufactured nostalgia. This straight up feels like a movie that you would have pulled out of a shelf in a VHS store between the late 80s and early 90s. Think of things like Frankenhooker and Basket Case. There's so many of those iconic, weird, low-budget horror movies that we ended up falling in love with for decades, and this is what this reminds me of. This is a true throwback to VHS I don't want to say grindhouse, but you know, that splatter film era. It's so good to see VHS really capture that, and they brought some heavy hitters. We have Scott Derrickson, David Bruckner, Gigi Saul Guerrero. These are pretty strong filmmakers who are really showing the hell out in this in this whole anthology. Each one of their segments really sticks with me, and there's a couple of here that I will remember for quite some time. So this is my little review section. You're here for the ranking though. You're here to see from worst to best. Let me see your picks down in the comments below. Before I get into mine, I want to know yours. Now let's get into my ranking. In the grand tradition of VHS movies, the worst one, or at least the weakest one for me, is the wraparound story. I love David Bruckner. I interviewed him on this channel. You guys can see it up here. He's a filmmaker. I really enjoy The Night House. So strong. Total Copy, I don't know, it was a bit too Stranger Things for me. It's a bit too sci-fi horror, and especially in a low budget capacity. Sci-fi horror needs more time to cook. We need more time to sit with these ideas, and as the wraparound story, it just doesn't get that time to really sit and settle with you. It maybe if it was just one whole segment by itself, kind of not the wraparound vibe, it could have been a bit better. But with Total Copy, we have this alien being who's starting to form. Rory, I believe his name is. I don't know. I was not hooked by it. Every time we would cut to it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the wraparound story. But like I said, this is kind of a tradition for the VHS movies. From first, second, third one, 95, viral, all of 94, all of these. I'm just like, okay on a wraparound. There is yet to be one that to me really wraps these together, that really feels like a through line through each and every one of them. It struggles a bit to have that vibe, and then as its own little story, it just doesn't really do much for me. I could have seen Total Copy as something a bit stronger, as maybe its own whole segment, but as a wraparound and what is presented, this to me is the weakest of the bunch. The next one in my ranking that isn't that great, but isn't bad, again, none of these are a horrible segment, for me is TKNOGD. I found this one to be the most solid idea, but the execution was just so lackluster. We're having a woman wanting to face off against the god of technology. It's a public access show, very 80s. There's this weird little VR headset. There's something that feels a bit futuristic to this. It was kind of pushing the boundaries. I like when my VHS segments stay within their gimmick. So this one just was a bit okay. You know, when she ends up meeting like the devil of technology, that's where things really pick up. But this is one of those ones where by the time it really picks up, you're like, oh, yeah, it's over now. It's just one of those bland segments in a thing, which, again, good filmmaker, good vibes. I like the idea here, but this one just found, to me, the most lackluster. The most, like, solid premise. Oh, this is going to be good, but it never went that extra mile to really surprise me, especially when there's one that's, like, a two-parter in here. We have one about, like, Mexican gods of death. When we get to this one, you're like, oh, okay, technology, we're in the 80s, you know, it's very like war games kind of vibe. I get what they're trying to do. It just does not hit the way it should. I like public access. I work in public access myself. I like what they tried to really do here, but there's far better segments, and this one is just one of those ones that you kind of forget by the time it's over. On my ranking, the one that places in the middle for me is one of the most brutal, one of the most humorless, kind of nasty ones I've seen, and it's from Scott Derrickson, and it's Dreamkill. This one is a very strong idea. We get a group of police officers who get some footage sent to them about a grisly, disgusting murder, and then the murders happen later on. Like, it's weird, and we find out, we won't get into too many spoilers, that somebody's able to kind of record their dreams. It's really good. It's really brutal. It's just a little too brutal for me. There's a nihilistic tone to this one, where some of the other ones are a bit more lighter, a bit more fun. I'll talk about my favorite in the end, but that one had a very 80s slasher vibe. This one had more of like Henry Portrait of the Serial Killer vibes. This is mean. And I think Scott Derrickson, I don't usually consider him a filmmaker like this. Doctor Strange, Black Phone, Sinister, he's a strong filmmaker, and I really like this idea, and I think this one is executed pretty well. It just came off so harsh to me. I don't know if maybe I wasn't in the mood for like extreme violence and graphic horror like this one depicted. It's a crazy idea though. I love the dream premise. I love, very 80s with, Freddy Krueger looming around, and then just the brutality. This one just felt maybe too real for me. I like my over-the-top kind of more fantastical horror in VHS when it's so low budget and so short film. It really hits you hard, and you're kind of like, oh, I don't know how to really feel about this. This one just punches you in the face. I can see people either loving this one or hating this one, but for me, it just kind of falls directly in the middle. Gigi Saul Guerrero is one of those filmmakers I keep seeing in this industry, and I'm like, please give her the biggest budget horror film you could possibly give her, because what she does with God of Death, oh my goodness, this one feels the most VHS. This one feels a bit like Wreck. This one reminds me of Safe Haven from VHS 2. This is really, really interesting. So we kind of start off with this like, I don't want to say newscaster, but this kind of psychic lady. She's kind of with vibes, and she's setting up something. Think of Walter Mercado, very 80s, 90s figure that we had. And then there's an earthquake, and then it sends a rescue crew to find these people, and they keep going lower and lower into this thing until they end up in this very traditional Mexican Aztec god area, and it gets brutal. Like, this one is brutal, but it's a bit more fun. There's some interesting, like, humor between the characters, and this one, the setup I love a lot. And then by the time we're at the end, I'm like, this got gory. It got powerful. There's something about this one. We deal with multiple gods, it feels like, in this one, with the god of technology. Then we have the god of death here. And then we have this, like, dream kid. Like, all of these are very kind of high fantasy, high concept. This one almost scales it back a bit. It's a high concept, but maybe it being so rooted in traditional, like Mexican storytelling, it really allowed it to feel a bit more personal to me, a bit more easy to digest. I found this one really interesting. This is the only little bout of nudity we get. We get some pretty good gore, not as good as gore as we get and the next segment, my favorite one. But I really like what this one had. This is one of those ones where I see Gigi as a filmmaker and I'm like, give her more. This just whets your appetite just enough that you're like, I could see her going further and doing more and pushing it, and she needs the budget. Like, this is just a good demo reel almost of what she can do as a filmmaker. Give her, like, why didn't she direct La Llorona, the Conjuring universe version? Like, where is she at in this industry really providing stuff? Because if she can do what she did with God of Death here in this smaller capacity, imagine what she could do more. This is actually one of the other ones that I would like to see spread out to a full feature. VHS has done it before. They're not, you know, much like the Grindhouse movies from Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez, where they've spanned off their fake trailers. Some of these VHS segments have made it to full features, and this is one that I could definitely see hitting the Mexican community well and being one of those, like, international films that comes to horror fans in the States and really blows our minds. Mike Nelson gets 2 little segments in this piece, and boy does he use the most out of his time. No Wake and Ambrosia are 2 of the most brutal but kind of crazy and funny and weird premises I've seen in a while. So No Wake kind of kicks things off after the kind of total copy intro that we get. So in our first official segment, we are in the worst vacation you can ever imagine. They are kind of vaguely told to not go into the lake. Then when they get to the lake, they are attacked by a bunch of people with guns, and it's some of the most graphic violence. But the violence is not the end of these characters, because they can't die. They're stuck in this limbo. Think of like an American Horror Story season where, like, Murder House or Hotel or 1984, when they're stuck in their little place where they die at. Kind of the same vibe here, but a bit different, because we see what these characters have to do to end up maybe possibly getting revenge, which we see later on in Ambrosia, which kind of connects to No Wake. This was a very interesting thing, because I've never feel like I've seen a part 1 and a part 2 in a VHS. They're vaguely separate, but they're very much in the same family. Mike Nelson ate this one up. No Wake has some of the most realistic gore effects I've seen in quite some time. It is brutally violent. Watching these people get murdered at first really takes you by, like, surprise, and it's brutal. Like I said, mean, but not as mean as I think the Derrickson one is. And I know that's going to be controversial. There's going to be people who love each one, but I like this one because the meanness is undercut by all of them realizing they're dead and being like, yeah, I feel great. Here is my intestines hanging out. I found myself laughing, and then by the time we get to Ambrosia, I'm like, oh, I'm not laughing anymore. We're meeting the psychopaths. We're meeting how brutal things can truly get. That's kind of the word I feel about this VHS. It is brutal. There's light levity throughout some of them, but this is one of the more heavier, one of the more gory, one of the more memorable VHS segments and overall VHS films that I've seen yet. Well, everyone, that is my ranking for this latest VHS movie. I really loved 1985. I think Shudder and the whole team involved really nailed this one. But what did you all think? What is your favorite segment? Send me your rankings down below. Let me know your favorite VHS segment overall. Like, are you a Safe Haven fan like me? Did you like the one that inspired the Siren movie that we got from that first VHS movie? Share your feelings in the comments below. Give me a thumbs up and make sure you guys are subscribed to Flickering Myth. Alright, everyone, let's talk about VHS 1985 and fun horror movies like this right down below.